we brought this up even in the last podcast, right? About the idea of community. And then you were kind of just telling me that you were thinking about how to build a community in this time. And then yesterday, we kind of hung out a bit. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to introduce all this because we like yesterday morning, so like 24 hours ago, we're like we should like we all wanted to play Among Us and no one has enough friends in real world to like get that together, but we're all engineers, we all know how video games work, so we're like we should play a big game of Among Us. And we're gonna like we could do it with the Discord server that we have for Snowpack, the open source project that I work on. Like let's get a big game of Among Us going, and we like are like, oh, we're getting all excited. Like none of us have played. We've just like watched people on YouTube play this game. That's like Mafia or Secret Hitler, if you're familiar with those. Um, and so we're like, it's 5 o'clock. We're all getting excited, and then it's like we post a link out, and it's just like total crickets. And then Henry joins, and Henry's like, yeah, I love this game. I thought this was an interesting idea. I wanted to see what you all were doing. And we ended up playing Codenames instead, but it was just like such a fun experiment for what it was, which is just like open source communities and like communities in general, like blurring the lines between what an online community used to be for, which was really like, hey, we have this common interest and we're just going to talk about that.
Hmm.
If like what we were like, no, there's actually this thing that like only our only way to do this would be to bring together people from this community, and starting to rely on that more for social connections, for bringing people together on like yes, we all have a common interest, but like we also all like this other thing too. Like, why don't we go and do that and like have fun doing it?
Yeah, I did get the feeling that like one, a lot of open source people don't necessarily like hang out with one another. Like we talk to each other on Twitter about various stuff, but like I think everyone like plays games just by themselves or doing their own thing. We don't really like hanging out. Not that you have to. It's just kind of interesting that doesn't really happen as much. So I did have the same idea of like, oh, we should like play something. It didn't have to be Among Us because I was thinking about this like a long time ago. But even I guess even before COVID. But now it's like people gather in their like you mentioned this. In the beginning of quarantine, it seemed like everyone was getting on their Zoom calls and whatever it was,
I had
and
like
then
nightly, I had like a family
uh,
Zoom. I had a friends from high school Zoom. I had like a college friend Zoom.
and then
Yeah, it
just
was almost too much.
yeah, I mean maybe that's why like it was like every day because you're like, I need this like social interaction or something, and then suddenly I don't know what happened. It wasn't suddenly, right? Over time, less and less people show up, and eventually you don't like. I had this feeling where I was like, I don't even want to like I really do want to talk to people at the same time. I don't want to be the one to start it. I don't want to initiate
Right.
anything. You're like, because you always feel like, oh, I'm the one that's always telling people to do things, and you kind of just want someone to ask you, like, hey, hang out, and you're just waiting for someone to just come by, and you're like, of course, like, please, yeah,
Yeah, I've only recently in my life realized that like that I'm that person. I'm totally the follow on. Like I am rarely the person setting up the game and always the person like, oh yeah, it sounds great.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, maybe there's something there. Like I think it's interesting. Like I don't know if we talk about that enough. That whole idea that like, why did we all just maybe we just all got bored and like I remember so specifically just the feeling of like, why don't we do this all the time? This is so great. I feel so happy and lucky to have like friends who I can hang out with. We should do this more often. And then like within a month, oh guys can't make it this week, sorry. And then like you do that enough times and people just kind of stop.
yeah. Oh, I guess I'm kind of reminded now of like this. There's this balance of like wanting that scheduled thing, or like every week you do something. So maybe you meet your friends. I guess people would say like they meet at a bar or like, and you know that they're gonna be there because it's every week, or
Yeah.
you go to church every week or whatever it is. And then now everything's disrupted. You might not be able to do that. But I do like the idea of this kind of maybe natural way of meeting people where you don't know who's going to be there, but you expect to either meet someone new or a friend, but you don't actually have to tell them. Like I don't know why that feeling to me is cool. Like you're just like, oh, that's just the place people show up,
Yeah.
like a park or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's why I'm so excited about this idea of can we bring more social things into open source, or at least our open source community is like at a certain size, it's not about okay, everyone has to come, and if everyone doesn't come, they're like letting anyone down, but much more like every Thursday at this time we do this thing, and like please come, But if you can't, that's totally fine also. Like the group won't live and die by your attendance. It's totally self-sustaining.
Yeah. And like whether that can like do we even need that to scale? It's okay if there's only like 3 or 4 people as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I like video games for that as well. It's like there are games that work with 4 people, as we saw, yesterday.
Yeah.
There's games that work with 100 people. You can play like Quiplash or one of those Jackbox party pack
Jackbox.
games.
Right, that got super popular over I guess the
I
quarantine.
when I tried to show it to people for like a COVID hangout
Mm-hmm.
early on, the servers just died. Like they were clearly
Yeah.
not scaling with this like newfound.
Yeah, I guess it's the same for Among Us and whatever new like I guess everyone's looking for the next Among Us or whatever.
Yeah,
And they are all so very like they're not like technical like a lot of people that are not necessarily into the more hardcore video games. It's a lot more casual. It's okay if you lose. Like although some people take these kind of games very too seriously, I think.
definitely,
So
definitely, yeah. Yeah, you're definitely bringing in people who now are just like, I'm bored, and it's one of the few things I can't go to movies anymore. I can't do this with my friends. Oh, what's this game that you said is really fun? Yeah, I would love to do. Like, yeah, definitely video games are reaching, I think, a new type of audience, which I think Among Us totally shows.
yeah, I guess yeah. You're saying that like how do we kind of build that when it's like not the norm, right, in open source to even like I even we almost have the opposite thing, and I wonder if that's kind of partially from like GitHub too. Of I like in a lot of talks I used to say that like oh GitHub is very transactional, right? We talk about issues and PRs, and that's the language that we use to talk about our contributions, our graphs, all numbers, how
Yeah,
many notifications, and then it's like discussions helps because it's a different kind of word, but just the idea of like playing games with people is just like, well, aren't we supposed to do our work? Or like, like
right.
it's almost like you can't have fun or something.
Yeah, Discord is kind of blowing my mind a bit, and I'm starting to
Mm,
get the sense that there is a strategy going on here. But so we set up a Discord for snowpack, which is like really the first time I've spent much time on Discord. And like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I want to see how other people set up their channels, how other people set up their servers. So I'm like joined the Svelte community, I joined the Vue community, I joined
mm,
the React community, like, and all of a sudden like, oh, my sidebar now has these different places, and I see them talking about snowpack like in the context of their community. I like jump in and like answer a question. I like, it's such a different frame of Twitter, which is how I primarily like do most open source interactions, where it's like all like by virtue of you talking to followers, which is like the kind of general setup of any Twitter interaction. It's like someone is the follower here of the other. It's like very much like me.
mm.
Every interaction I have, unless I'm replying to someone, and then it's them. But it's like very much this like debate style almost. But like Discord has been this totally like, no, it's like I'm joining um, different like watering holes is a term that I really like, which I didn't coin, but it's like I'm like going into this community and like very clearly instead of like a one-on-one interaction, it's like a me stepping
So,
into a community,
I
and it's
see.
like the feeling of community is like almost like over, not overwhelming, but it's like definitely there. And it's like it seems more, I don't know, I don't know what it means, but I'm realizing like this could replace what I get out of Twitter in a lot of ways of just like, here are all the different communities that care about what I'm working on, and I can go to them and they can come to me, and all of a sudden like the all the problems of Twitter start to kind of disappear in that world where, I shouldn't say all the problems, but like it just becomes so much more about community building versus like me building my audience or like people dragging other people on Twitter. Like there's definitely problems with the Discord model, but it seems much more community based, which I really like.
Yeah, I guess it might be interesting to think about. I mean, I don't think it's worth that much to talk about, but like how that relates to like how Slack is done, because in some sense they're both the same thing, but Discord started from gaming, um, and I think the ease of signing up and being able to join. I guess Twitter is interesting because there are different communities on Twitter. So there's like tech Twitter and whatever Twitter, but it's still all on the same platform. And and you can retweet something that someone will see that's not in your community, and they're not going to have any context, and they're going to have their hot take on things. But you will have, like you said, I think when you join, you actively have to like join a community in
Mm-hmm.
Discord. You see kind of the history, you see all their channels, you kind of see if people are talking, you have a sense of what you said, community and
There's
context.
rules.
Yeah,
Yeah, like when
rules.
you
That
join this
that's a
community, we
huge.
have rules.
That's actually like it's funny that you bring that up because, and that is the first thing you see because usually they have some kind of huge thing you have to read before you sign up, and you can't say anything for like X minutes.
Right.
I think that's really good because Twitter, yeah, there are definitely no rules because anyone can just make an account and say whatever they want. Um, and same with GitHub. You know, I wish like that's where I was like, oh, it would be interesting if like GitHub could be more like Discord in that sense of you said you're supposed to look at the code of conduct and the README and the contributing guide, but no one does that. And even the way it looks, actually, that's why a cool part about Discord. You know, you can put your little like logo and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Things look different, so you
Yeah.
feel like you're in a different place. You know, like when you visit a different city, it's like obviously different. But
Yeah.
at GitHub, everything is the same. The way you report issues are the same, and so you don't you just assume that everyone has the same like norms, and that
Yeah.
ends up being a bad thing, right?
The big that's like GitHub's big question, right? Is like over the next couple of years, can they make that transition from like a repo is a repo and it's a technical thing versus like I think we've for a while, at least for large projects, have seen it's like really about community. It's like giving issues like they're kind of making sure there's a way to go through and troubleshoot, making sure people have a way to search issues, um, managing moderators, like managing discussions, like all these things. Like GitHub's clearly moving there. It's just a question of like, will they? Yeah, I don't know. Will they serve that need of what discussions is kind of getting at, which is like you want a place where your community can go.
Yeah, and it's definitely a lot harder. Like they can add all the features of community, but like, will that change the culture of what people think of when they
Yeah,
go on GitHub? And that's really the real question of like, like you said, like every medium has a certain kind of vibe to it, right? There's like that meme about like the different pictures that you have on like Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and some Twitter or something like that, right? And like LinkedIn is very professional. If the medium didn't matter, you could say the same content in all of them. It would do the same thing. But clearly, people act differently depending on where they are. And so, if Discord seems a lot more like friendly and community based, then why does GitHub seem more like work oriented and you
yeah,
get all these different vibes, right?
yeah, yeah. It's really. I think it's also like hanging over all of this is like you kind of need both. So it's like two sides of a spectrum. There's a place where you need like your knowledge base that lives on, and Discord's terrible for that, right? Like within the day, that content is just I can't find it even, and I'm the person who's responsible for keeping it um, manageable. So it's like there's like it's different types of context and different types of content for different needs. But yeah, I've just been really enjoying Discord for the community side of it, and I think it's like starting to test my idea of what an open source community is, where it's like obviously we're all in this Discord because we care about this, not just the tool, but like the problem space, and people want to keep in touch and follow up on it and get updates. But like, there's also just a sense of like, I don't know, like, yeah, what does it mean? What does it mean if you re-architected the whole open source world around these different communities instead of around different repos, around different, thought leaders on Twitter? It's a very different world, at least from my point of view as someone um, who spends a lot of time here.
Mm,
That's probably the other thing is like most people don't care. Like I definitely like I think I or at least we probably both think about this more than the average person.
yeah, yeah. It's a lot less broadcasty because it
Yeah,
feels like you're just one person out of many that are having a conversation,
yeah,
right?
yeah. The other like fascinating takeaway is like all like because there's a overall thing about Slack here, which is that Slack doesn't as actively said they don't want this for themselves. Like they have really bad moderation. Like the whole thing is designed under the assumption. Drew Powers in our like on our team always says like they assume that there's an HR department that can like cancel an account if you say something wrong. Like they assume there is this outside moderator um, hanging above Slack, which is to like moderate bad people by firing them or having them
Right.
sit down for an HR meeting. So it's like you realize how much of open source tooling is around moderation and healthy moderation, and how much Discord has had to solve this by video games being incredibly like a ton
Toxic.
of potential for toxic behavior. So you show up here with like, oh, I wonder if they have good moderation tools. It's like, oh no, we've had to do this but worse for the last 5 years. Um, Yeah, they definitely, the moderation tools are pretty top notch.
Yeah, and we're still like one of the older communities on Slack, and I'm like, yeah, everything about it sucks for
Yeah,
what we want to do. Yeah, yeah.
move to Discord. I'll be your first. I'll be your first member.
Well, I made one already. But I made it for the Babel like hackathon thing. But I guess I'm sort of like doing that in order to slowly move us
Yeah,
over. 'Cause,
there's a bunch of JavaScript like thought leaders who joined Discord, the company, which is why I think that this is.
mm-mm,
I say that like jokingly, like thought leaders, whatever, but like Twitter famous people, Seb specifically
mm-hmm,
of Yarn and Rome and all that. Around when he joined, they started a Discord server for JavaScript called houseparty.js. And it was like totally starting to explore these ideas. It's been really quiet since then, so it never really took off to the way
ah,
that
interesting.
whether they thought it was just a funny joke or if they really meant for it to take off. But yeah, it was this idea of like it's a JavaScript Discord server, so it's not about any one community. It's like about everyone. So
Mm-hmm.
really broad in that way, but like really leaning into the community side of it. So we're not here to like only talk about any certain tech. It's much more like there were just kind of like goofs, like yeah, more of the community side of open source communities.
Right. There's like a what random channel usually. It's like the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
thing is that, I guess.
yeah. So it's like there's. I love that people are experimenting with this because I think it's one of the things that GitHub by its design doesn't do well, um,
Mm-hmm.
which is the it's all repo based. It's community is kind of this afterthought, or it's seen through the lens of like we want to help your company manage your repos.
Right. I mean, I think I know. So like Chris Biscardi has this Discord called Party Corgi. I haven't
Yeah,
been
that's
on it,
another
but
great
yeah,
example.
yeah, that's basically that, right? I think that seems like a good group to do that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that, and I think that's where I think if I remember correctly, they're all very big into live streaming and like it seems to be this other kind of other way of doing it, which is much more like yeah, you're building this kind of content, not machine because that almost sounds negative. I mean this in a really positive way. Like you're building a community, you're creating content for that community, you're creating membership, you're creating this like in group mentality again, which can be negative, but I see them doing it at least. I hope in a positive way.
Mm. Oh, Rob on chat said he was in the Discord server, but then
Oh,
for like
which
five
one?
minutes, or the I think Sebastian. I'm assuming Sebastian's, but then it
Oh
got
yeah.
reset.
Yeah. Well, there was a funny story of it because I think it was like five people in it, like Seb and someone from Google, and I can't remember everyone's names.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think was it Dominic? I think someone just like shared a link, like here you go, and then like they made it this big thing. It was kind of a funny.
Okay. All right. I think that's another thing. It's like, how do you really like? How do you want your? Oh yeah, it got leaked. Okay, but
Yeah,
how do you want your like?
but it got leaked by one of like five people who was responsible. So it wasn't like someone hacked it. Like someone just decided to share it, and that's how it became the
Yeah,
community.
and I think that's where it's like, how do you want your community to grow? Do
Yeah,
you just want like all these people to join in for just because, or is it you want to slowly kind of do it and get people that really are committed? And I think that's like a really broad question of like same with open source. Like all these people, they see the success of certain projects and they are wondering why that happened or like how come my project's better, like it's faster or whatever, all this stuff. And it's like why are we chasing this kind of version of success?
yeah,
Those numbers, like those numbers are people, and those
yeah.
people, how like how loyal, not loyal, but like how much are they committed to this project anyway? Are they just using it? Like it's better. It seems like like now it's like I'd rather have a smaller number of people than like a lot of people that kind of like I liked it, but they don't really care. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have our fair share of drive-bys, and I think I would be considered a drive-by for a lot of the communities. That's like the weird part about Discord. Like, you go to check it out, and you've joined it. Which,
That's a good
if
thing
they're
too, right?
if they're growth hacking that on purpose, well
Oh,
done. But
oh,
it's
oh, I
like
see.
it makes your numbers like like if I look right now at what
Sure.
snowpack has, oh, I can't.
Right.
I don't know the URL well
Yeah, I
enough,
guess
but
that number, I meant more of like, then it's almost like that you're a tourist. You're not
mhm.
trying to be in the community, and that can be good because then you're making distinction. Like I'm not long term in this thing. I'm just trying to check it out, and that's a fine. That's a good thing. It's sort of like open source. Most people are only going to use your code. They're never even going to report an issue at all, right?
Yeah.
They don't even know that it exists. They just happen to use your tool somehow. And that doesn't bother us because that doesn't like affect our attention. That doesn't
Yeah.
affect our currency, which is our time. But the people that are doing that, they're taking up time. They're like overly taking up our time. Maybe then it's like, how
Yeah.
do we? Okay, maybe going back to what I want to talk about too was like, how do we learn to say no to things as maintainers when our culture is telling us we have to say yes to everything and be inclusive and welcoming. But that definition doesn't mean that you should let people like, I guess in some sense, step on you and tell you what to do. Because in the end, that means you're not really a maintainer anymore. You're just kind of just like you're not able to even make judgment calls on what the project should go to just because everyone else is telling you what to do. And I feel like that all the time. Like I don't
Yeah.
know what to do anymore either.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's even like more not sinister, but the idea that you're rewarded early on, especially for saying yes to stuff. Like
Mm,
early snowpack was kind of us being like, hey, we have this idea. Do people like this? And if someone says, yes, I like this, but I wish it could do dot, 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 it was like, well, that is literally the strongest signal we have of where to go from here. So we're awesome. Great. Thank you. As you grow, you start to get a better sense of what you're working on yourself
yeah.
and what people like. And all of a sudden, that means that, by virtue of getting a lot of people asking for things, you now know what is a good idea or a bad idea, not definitively, but more like you have this heuristic. And all of a sudden, you're now put in this position where you, for the health of the project, need to say no. And
Yeah.
for
And
the health of yourself, obviously.
yeah. You have a better sense of what your values are. And we like to say the word trade-off all the time. And the reason why we can do that is because we can are able to compare what the values are of say like speed versus configurability versus like, size or whatever it is. And I think in the beginning, no one knows what that is. Everyone's kind of at the edges, kind of pushing the project. And so you just add in a bunch of things that don't really make any cohesive sense. But that's okay in the beginning. But eventually, your project's really big, and like most projects, you kind of just cave in and you bloat it, right? And there's
Yeah.
just all this stuff that's seems unnecessary. But the only reason why you knew that is because you have a better vision of what the project is. If you didn't, then yeah, maybe all those things are fine.
Yeah. Yeah. You also like, I don't, GitHub's getting better at this, but the tools they give you are really blunt, right? Like you have
Mm.
these issues where it's like, this is why discussions can't come soon enough, but they require a different way of thinking, which is that somebody asking for something isn't a yes no anymore. It's a
Mm-hmm.
discussion. So like, hey, I really want this. You don't have to say, okay, I either leave this open and abandon them, I leave it open and work on it so that I can close it, or I close it, which is this like really mean kind of like, it always feels like a slight, right? Even if it's like, nah, sorry, we can't do this right now, but you're closing an issue on someone who's trying to help. Like there's no way to spin that isn't, you know, um,
Right.
doesn't easily come off that way at least.
Yeah, and then their wording of like answered versus unanswered is very different than closed or
Yeah. I
resolved, right?
completely ignore that in discussions. I'm like, if you want to mark what I've just said as an answer, that's fine. But I've never clicked that button once in our community.
And it doesn't actually another interesting thing is like discussions doesn't have a number on it. Like
Yeah,
issues, it tells you have 1,000 open issues, right? But discussions, it's just there, and there could be an infinite number of those, and that's fine. And I think that's a
yeah,
very good psychologically. I think that is better for both everyone.
yeah. Well, it's like anyone who's ever tried to create a heuristic of like, oh, this repo has 1,000 open issues. It must be very popular. Like, or it has 1,000 issues and they've abandoned the community and no one's answering anything.
Right.
Or like there's no, yeah, it's the number means nothing. It's purely just like, especially when you get into the issues, it's like it's a way to, how noisy is this? Like how hard am I like going to have to search for something? Yeah,
Yeah.
we run things really like differently, which is that anyone can create a discussion about anything, but issues are really reserved for like this has been triaged or this has been prioritized. Like someone from the team is basically like, imagine just giving it a thumbs up of like this is priority. Um, we've triaged it or it's a feature request that we want to work on. And what that means is our issues are only like 10 to 20 long at any one time.
Hmm.
Even though we have like hundreds of discussions, the issues themselves, it always fits on one page, which means that a new person can come in and really quickly like, oh, these are things that I can work on. It's so many times I've gone into issues where it's like, oh, there's 1,000 issues. Like, how am I supposed to know what's a good first issue or how I can get involved? But if there's 20 and some are marked as good first issue and you have this understanding that they're all important, all of a sudden it's like such a different kind of invitation. Like, please, yes, jump into any one of these. They're all valuable.
Yeah. And you're just working within the limits of the GitHub UI. See, it's
Yeah.
kind of funny that that behavior came up because it's like, okay, if you know there's a lot, you're not going to even engage on the repo. So you're like, okay, the only way to do this is to make it small enough.
Yeah.
Or the Lodash model of all issues have to be bug reports, but feature requests, they're all closed.
Yeah. We basically stole that. We
Okay.
stole that and moved it for discussions instead of issues. Um,
Yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It's really, it's like, it's everything that we do on our project. It's like realizing how much of the tools that you have dictates how you think about the world. Um, but yeah, it's like, that's why I like Discord. That's why I think like the GitHub community stuff is so interesting, where it's like, you start to realize like, oh, closing an issue is a weird thing to do. Really, it's just the thing we've been doing since GitHub was invented, but doesn't mean it's the best way to do this.
Yeah. Um, how about we go into, because you kind of brought up like, I mean, we're talking about like community engagement, and you brought up meetups. And so you were mentioning like before, you would have meetups, they were sponsored, you would give them like free pizza, whatever. And now, if the meetups are just online and just watching some video from someone, it doesn't feel like a meetup anymore,
Yeah,
right?
I'd introduce the idea like a little differently, which is that I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone worries about what does the world look like when there's no conferences, or like conferences are online, right? Because so many people, it meant a lot to them to go to a new town or a new city. Um, some people were dev advocates, and that was their job. Like
Mm-hmm.
people were really affected by that, on a really personal level. But like at a community level, I think the meetup question is much different, or maybe even more important to some communities, where it's like all of a sudden now the like your San Francisco JavaScript meetup, or your New York or your small town. Like if you don't live in a major city, like your town's meetup, um, all of a sudden now has gone remote or just disappeared. And so if it's disappeared now, a part of your community is gone. And if it's gone remote now, like it's trying to figure out how do you live in a remote world, which is you just play videos, right? Is kind of the default. They're really naive. Like, okay, let's take what we had and move it to remote, which means like every day, once a month, we will show videos and we'll all watch them together. But that's a very different question of like, is that the best way to do this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you really getting the community, which a meetup is really kind of known for having over a conference, the like local area community, when you just watch videos online with other people at a meetup?
Right. And you might not be like, it's different from, I was thinking of like Netflix party where you're watching a movie with your friend versus like, not that those people aren't your friends, but it's more like acquaintances.
Yeah.
And so that kind of interaction, you might want something different of like, you're not actually engaging with anyone. You're just kind of getting this one-way communication. And I guess I've heard of a lot of people say that conferences, like, even though it is around talks, most of the value of conferences is around all these other small, just like, I guess you would call them serendipitous moments because people just happen to be in the same place, like we
Right. The
mentioned
hallway
earlier.
track.
Yeah, the hallway track, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and like that's a big. I don't even think I realized how much that I've spoken at two conferences since COVID happened, and it's like, as a speaker, I'm not really sure what I get out of it anymore. Where like it
Yeah,
used
I
to
was
be this thing
wondering.
like, okay, I'll do a free talk because I care about sharing these ideas and I want to meet people at the conference. Like all those serendipitous moments, they mean just as much for me as a speaker as when I'm an attendee. But like now without that, like as a speaker, like wait, why am I doing all like? There's a lot of work that goes into a talk. Why am I doing this again?
Just because I actually I'm saying like a lot of stuff is just because
Yeah, it's just
I haven't like spoken at any conferences since COVID started. I haven't even been to any.
yeah,
I guess I haven't been honestly I haven't even been on Twitter much either, so I don't even know
yeah.
what's going on for most things.
You haven't missed much.
Yeah.
The world's on fire, and that's
Yeah, exactly.
culturally and literally in California.
Uh, yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about I guess the value of localism and not caring about scale. And this is related to this too. Of like everything's like every year the conference gets bigger and more people, and somehow that's supposed to be a good thing. Just saying with open source, we have more users, all this stuff. It's like why? And this I don't know if this is related to like startup culture and VCs and raising money and all this stuff. It's like why do I feel like more is better?
Yeah.
I mean, even coding, we talk about like less is better. um, and so I think our instinct is to go for like escalation and more, and it's so hard to get it away from that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, conferences specifically, they have a financial, right? Bigger
mhm.
means more sponsors, means more money. And, you know, most conference organizers I've met have their intentions in the right place, but like it's also a financial, it's a lot of work to do. There's a financial reward for the people who do it,
Right, right.
as there should be. But, it's the incentives are there to go bigger and bigger every year. I think what's interesting to me is like, okay, so taking this idea one step further of like a meetup gave you a community that was local to you, and you had something in common, and it was that like smaller community where you could get a little bit more of a meaningful connection out of it. Um, in a world where I have no local in-person connections anymore, all of my connections are now phone, video call, Discord servers, like GitHub issues. I'm like literally cataloging the interactions I have with other humans, and they're all remote, as I think most people have. And so then the question becomes, well, now like a meetup centered around a location doesn't buy
Mm,
me anything special. It's not a bad idea, and I'm sure they will exist well into the future. But like, it's more like, yeah, something about the Discord model is really making me question, like, do I really want just a collection of communities around these things that I care about? And the size of the thing dictates the size of the community. So like, I don't know, like Sellers of Catan is a really fun board game.
mhm.
And I've seen one streamer has created a Discord community for Catan. Like, cool. Like maybe that's where I get my little like group interactions from. And maybe it's not specific like San Francisco Node.js meetup.
Right.
It's like a mixing of the local is no longer giving me anything. So now I'm trying to realize like what does that mean? Does that mean that meetups become more around shared interests?
Mhm.
Like kind of like
Right.
you're going from high school to college, or like now you're friends with people because you literally all live in the same place and that's all you have. To now you're friends because you all like the same things, or that sort of idea of
Mm.
widening the net means that there's more. I like to think that ultimately it could lead to more rewarding interactions, more rewarding friendships and communities.
Right. So I guess localism was literally about locality, but then now it could be about interest. Um,
I don't know. I mean, a big part of this is I don't know, but like I think that has implications for everyone, right? Of just if everything can be, the world becomes a much less manageable place. Like it's really easy to just say, okay, I'm looking for things in my community. That like on a filter on the world, that's a really nice filter because it just the world keeps growing, but your community generally stays. Maybe if you're in a city that's growing, but it's detached from the world size. Um, so it's like a little bit scarier to be like, I've
mhm.
now connected with everyone in the world who likes this one board game.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, you're in like this really like that. That can be an infinite, like generated world of content.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Um, I guess I want to bring up the church connection. It's the same problem.
Yeah, I
Um,
was gonna say that like the locality of a church is
kind of the whole
thousands
point,
of
right?
years that's been based on that.
And I think that's there's so many things that they say there where it's like, well, how are churches adapting? Um, and I think what is their attitude toward technology? I think for the most part, it's not very critical, and I think it should be. And instead, you kind of just like most of it, we just try to translate what worked before to the new medium, and it
Right.
doesn't work. We just you just said that with a meetup. You can't just play a video and it's the same thing.
Is that
Um,
what in your because I am not
mhm.
as familiar with this world?
Yeah,
Is it really okay? Church service in person is canceled. Everyone join this Zoom. Is it like that specific?
yeah.
No.
I mean, I think that Zoom has gotten so popular, like people don't even say like video chat. Like
Yeah.
they'll be like, especially like maybe older people that are not experienced with technology, they'll be on like Google Meet or something, and they'll still call it Zoom, right? Because that's
Yeah.
just what we say now. And I think that's interesting. Like, oh, get on Zoom, um, and and like people that they barely know how to use like a browser, they're like using Zoom and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, that's just like maybe it's like a school and they kind of force everyone to use Zoom,
Yeah.
um, or like church or whatever. And yeah, and so are we gonna translate that? So like maybe it was already a problem before because especially in like Western, I'd say like for Christianity, like sermons became like TED Talks where you kind of just say things, and you feel maybe good about it at the end and you go home. And it's like, that's not really community either.
Yeah.
And so if we translate that, that's literally what that will become. It's just that you listen to some talk and that was pre-recorded. Maybe you see some things in chat and then you go home. But like, if we're thinking about what the point is, then it's like, that doesn't change you at all. You're not opening yourself up to different
Yeah.
ideas. You're not able to talk to people about, discuss about those things. I mean, supposedly that's what small group is, but then you're also doing that on Zoom. um I'm doing like a live stream for our own church, and it's like,
Mhm.
I in some sense I kind of hate it because I know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And some people can't tell which parts are live, and like the whole thing is recorded. It's like, no, it's like there are parts that are like there, but you have to like coordinate all that. um
Yeah.
and I think there's actually a difference between doing something on Zoom versus doing it on, like, say, YouTube. So it's a lot more convenient to do this, like currently what we're doing now is like a stream. You could, like, say your church service is in the morning, you're like on your bed, and then you wake up, you're like, oh, I got my alarm, and you just like open your phone, like go like this, and you just watch it. And it's like,
You consume religion.
it's just like, it's kind of like lazy. You know how like the whole thing where like you work at home, you don't like dress up. Like some people do that because they feel like, I want to be in a different mode. Well, if you just woke up and supposedly you're trying to worship God of all people, right? Like, isn't it kind of weird to do that when you're just like lying in your bed?
Well, it's like by definition, like yeah, like if I'm watching like TikTok or YouTube or something,
Mhm.
it's like yeah, there's a part of my brain that's turned off. Like by definition, community can't be consumed like that because it is a interaction that you are giving and taking into the world.
Yeah, it becomes a lot more consumeristic. And so I'm saying even Zoom is better than YouTube in the sense of like, you kind of know that someone had to like log in, and you can maybe see people, assuming they even turn their video on. You can see their faces, you see how
Yeah,
many people are there, you can talk. That seems more. I mean, that's not a great substitute either, but it's better than YouTube, where the only thing you know is that there's a bunch of people watching. That's all you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um,
There's a number on the screen, which you can get that from a watch watch like a I don't know
yeah.
Gangnam Style. I'm trying to think like what's like the
Yeah.
most popular
Oh,
YouTube
and
video.
another thing is that before, you would go to some place, the local, we call it local body, which is interesting, that you go to. And now, well, you don't have to go to your church anymore. Maybe you don't like their sermon or the way they do their music or whatever. I'm gonna just start. We call it church shopping. You're gonna just go around finding which one you like. You can watch all of them, right? You can
Interesting. Wow.
you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
watch
yeah.
like 10 of them that day and feel good. And it's like, is that really changing? Like, is that really helpful? Really? Um,
Henry, you mentioned music. Is there room for a lo-fi chill beats church?
sure.
Is there room for that in the world?
I'm sure someone's thought of it.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah. But yeah, I guess I, I don't know. I guess I'm just sad, and
Yeah.
like, and to the point where I think some of us might not question. Like, you kind of get used to it, and you kind of don't. I think that if we're not longing for the time that we can meet together in person, especially for a religious thing, then I think something is wrong
Yeah.
with us. And so that's why I've been excited to, like, I actually started meeting with some friends in person outside with, like, like 3 or 4 people. So going back to a different way of doing church, and I would call it the house church model, which is what people did before. They don't meet at some building with like hundreds of people. You just go to someone's house and you do
Yeah.
it yourself. Someone can lead the worship music service. Someone can preach, in a sense, like a short little thing, and you talk about it. And that's a lot more like life giving,
Yeah.
even though no one's like professional or any of that stuff. It's just people talking. But I don't know, it's a lot better than just like watching some video, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, okay, so if the theory is events based around we all live in the same place aren't faring as well as events based around a shared interest. I mean, church is both of those things, but it's
Hmm.
definitely around a shared interest. Um, I wonder if what it also is just like now that it's so easy to join but so hard to really participate. I wonder if there is like a bit of a filtering out the people who aren't participating. Like, what's that? There's that. I don't know if it has a name, but there's that
Hmm.
term where it's like 90% of people online are consuming, and
Lurking.
10% are creating the content that the rest of them consume. Yeah, lurking. lurking versus consuming. And so like I wonder if this is just a natural part of like realizing like they need us more than we need them. Like if, not that that's the right mentality, but the idea
Mm-hmm.
of if what you're trying to get out of it isn't lots of views on your content, but actually community, real interaction, then you actually want to filter out people who aren't participating because they are just freeloading. Um, I think that there are more synonyms there, or like at least
Mm.
it's more in line with what I've seen on different communities where it's like not going from broadcaster to consumer, but much more like we're all here because we care about this. If you don't care, you will by definition be filtered out by you not being a part of it.
Yeah, there needs to be a level of how do we introduce depth into a
Yeah,
community. And I don't want to say like all this, live stream and digital stuff is bad. Clearly we work in technology. We care about technology. But I think it's important to know why do we like completely embrace all new things? And so one good thing would be, some people are not necessarily like comfortable with meeting people in person, especially if it's a new community. You want to be able to check it out without like being there, and then you kind of feel like everyone's looking at you, kind of thing. You can't do that. On YouTube, you can just show up, and you can choose to participate as you wish, which is good for those people. And it's probably a lot of people, honestly, like social anxiety, stuff like that.
yeah,
Um, but we don't. The bad thing is, I think we don't provide a way to kind of go from that to like joining. So say in the church context, like someone like just randomly stumbles upon our YouTube live stream or whatever you want to call it, Zoom call. Um, what incentive do they have to come back or to even reach out to someone in the church to get connected, or start to know people?
yeah.
Like that just seems so like intimidating, right?
Oh,
Um,
so I haven't been to church in a long time, but
mhm,
when I was a kid, I definitely
mhm,
remember that part of my church that my
mm,
family went to being like, for a minute now, I'm not going to say anything. You all have
yeah.
to shake hands, meet each other. Like, yeah, there's a part of it where it's like, what does that look like in this world of what does encouraging social connection, where it's like literally, I have nothing to do right now other than shake people's hands and say hi and like
Mm.
not make eye contact because I'm a kid and I'm scared. I would be terrified of that today though. Like, yeah, it's there's a part of enforcing it and like yeah, like building those on ramps into getting connected with people for someone who maybe isn't just like, here I am, interact with me. Someone maybe, in a lot of ways, I am someone who needs that kind of permission
Yeah,
to be a part of some
permission might be a
conversation.
good way to put it. And an invitation. And I don't know why they're like you don't have any context on like you don't know anything about that person. So it's like, why are they showing up? Is it because they just trying to find a church, or they're just looking for some kind of community? And so
Yeah,
I was even thinking, I was like, maybe we need to do a just a game thing, just to like get people to like, I don't know, relax, I guess, and then we can not talk more seriously, but just like kind of get to know people and see how it goes. And that's a very like unscalable thing, you know.
yeah, yeah. I hadn't really thought about that, and I really that's a really important part of it. That like invitation into the community is not really there for anything that I do today. Where it's like, again, I don't mean to be harping on Discord. Just I think it's a really useful kind of model for what I'm thinking right now, which is like I joined a Discord and now it's like I have to really like kind of pinch my nose and like post something that I have no idea like what the social norms are. Like no one has invited me. Hey Fred, welcome. Come on in. Why don't you start by telling us your name? Like there's none of that. It's just kind of like,
Yeah, that's
hey
that's
y'all.
mhm.
And you feel awkward. You just kind of have to swallow that awkward feeling. You kind of wish that someone would invite you
Mm.
into the community a
Right.
bit, even if they
I
don't know
feel
you.
like that model of like having an explicit time or place to do onboarding works. I mean, obviously this is true in a company. When you join, there like you get catered to, you get all this stuff. I mean, a lot of times it seems unnecessary, but
Yeah.
at least meeting people is nice. So whether it's for the church thing, or your own community, you could be like, oh, every this time we're just gonna be in this chat, and if you want to come talk to us, then you can join.
Yeah.
Because yeah, the whole like you can talk at any point is not inviting. Even
Yeah.
though you're like, well, because from our point of view, it's like we're always open. Like even this live stream, if someone comes in and they wanted to get to know us, we're kind of still talking to ourselves.
Yeah,
And
whoever posted that comment, the first comment in a live stream, oh my god, I'd be terrified.
yeah.
Like, I have all the respect in the world for that person, just like sharing an idea with
Hmm.
no context of what that's. There's no one before them. They were a trendsetter, truly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, it sounds like we're gonna have to be dealing with this for a lot a lot longer. So
We have time
yeah,
to think about it too.
yeah. I do think that I think there is a natural kind of I think that's happening. I think we're getting better at it. Like at least I just went to my first I was about to say Zoom. It was a Google Meet, but like my first VC video conference like funeral memorial service.
Oh wow.
And it was amazing to see people of all ages. Like I really was like going into like, oh, this could be terrible. Like half the people aren't going to be muted. I'm going to hear like someone eating on camera. Like it's going to be this like everything that I've taken from meetings and what goes wrong in a meeting at work. I was like, it's going to be that times 1,000 because it's
Mm.
people who aren't as familiar with technology. And it was like the exact opposite. Like it was all these older people who I wouldn't have thought would be able to do it. Like everyone like, and it wasn't the broadcast sense. It was like everyone had a little a box on the
Mm-hmm.
screen. And so it was this like real community vibe. It was like all these family members I hadn't seen in years, all
Yeah.
of a sudden just staring back at me and me staring at them. And like just like you were saying, like at the end of it, it was like kind of like, okay, that concludes the service. We'd like to just open it up to everyone to say hi if you want to share a memory. And all of a sudden it was like people like pulling me in, like, Fred, it's so good to see you.
Mm.
And like now I'm like all I wanted to do was like cancel out my camera and close it, just like general social anxiety. Instead, I was like pulled in the way that in-person events can really only make you ever do, or at least that's what I thought. So there was a really it gave me hope at least that there is
Mm.
something to be had here that like is better. Instead of, oh, that person couldn't fly out, they couldn't make the time, so I didn't get to interact with them. All
Right.
of a sudden, zero effort, I connected with every person who I knew through this one other person who had passed away. Like their whole network came together with zero friction. That was
Yeah.
fascinating in the abstract.
Yeah. I mean, that's really unfortunate that it's during a funeral, but like, I guess there can be moments of serendipity where you don't know someone's gonna show up on your call randomly, and then people, and you're like, oh wow, I haven't seen you in a while. Um, I Yeah, and so it's like, how do we create that space where people, like I meant like the bar or the park idea of like people are showing up. And it almost needs to be like a always on constant thing, so that like there's always someone there and you can kind of join in whenever for people that are available for that kind of thing. Um, so then it's not like it's not necessarily scheduled, but it's also like, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's just there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the startup thinking of like there's a one size fits all here.
Hmm.
I think that's like where it's like we start to think that way, but really it's like issues versus discussions, discussions versus community, like big groups versus small groups. Like you kind of want a little bit of everything. Like you
Yeah.
want a time where you can chat with this person one on one, but you also like it's fine if 90% of the time it's asynchronous. You want the options available, but you don't necessarily like, okay, that's the way we're going to do it forever.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with some of this, but like there are a lot more, because you brought up kind of having hope of the future of this stuff, and a lot more people are working on like spatial software in terms of chat. And so, even Discord and Zoom and all these, they're
Yeah,
basically a bunch of boxes, right, of people's faces.
yeah,
And I think we can do a lot better than that. And you can learn from a lot of design tools in gaming for sure, right? If you think about like Figma, people keep bringing that up for some reason around,
yeah,
like you can see everyone's cursor, they can like draw and do whatever they want. Games, you have an avatar that represents yourself. You can walk around in a
yeah,
3D or 2D space. Um, it feels more like freeing in a
yeah.
way.
You see
Yeah.
that in the VR community a lot
Uh
too.
huh.
Like because there is no roadmap for like where they've come from. It's like, oh my god, I'm in a new world. Like it like raw creativity. You see a lot of social things, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah. I've tried a few of these more like 2D versions, or they enable like spatial audio, which I think is pretty cool. Um, Being able to kind of like the idea of Zoom and has breakout rooms, right?
Yeah,
Where this admin has to kind of assign people, or I guess you can make it random or whatever. But it's very like, I'm in this room and then now I'm in this room,
yeah,
and it's just the context switching and all is not great. Versus this other thing where like, say you have a giant space and you can move around in it, but then only people within a certain radius or that room can hear you. You can just like, hey, I'm gonna go by, and you
yeah.
move on to another thing. There's no like, clicking a bunch of stuff. You kind of just seamlessly move between conversation, just like a normal
You know,
space.
people always make fun of like what movie did it so badly? Jurassic Park, I think, where they're like, I have to find the file, and they're like going through the computer, and they're like literally like moving around on the arrow keys from like folder to folder, like moving through a physical room. I wonder if that's what we're saying, is that like, yeah, there's a future here where like you bring together the idea of like Club Penguin and Discord.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you actually like, no, like let's make social things interactive in that way, that you actually like, I want to interact with it as a world, not as a chat app.
Yeah, and not as like a machine. I think that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like I was wondering like how much of like if programmers are designing these things and we think in lists and boxes and databases and stuff, then our UI looks that way too.
Totally.
Uh, and it's so hard to like that's just like the default. You're like, oh, of course. Well, if we're gonna talk, then we're gonna make it in a box or we're gonna
Yeah.
make it in a list. And instead, it's like, no, let's think differently about these
What
things.
was that? There was a game that was really popular because it was a multiplayer game where like you were trying to get to like a tower with a light, so you're like running through the desert, and it would pair you with someone else
Oh
doing
yeah,
the
yeah,
exact
yeah.
same game. But there was no talking. It was like totally. I thought that was so fascinating because you realize that that's where all the like toxic behavior comes from. It's when you can actually create words. But there's this total social connection you'd have with someone over the course of hours,
Mm-hmm.
and you would never actually say a word to them. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, Drew just mentioned, yeah, Club Penguin is the future of OSS.
No,
You
but if
heard
you want
it.
to tie it all together, Among Us as a chat app is what I think I'm getting at.
Okay, I like that too. Among Us. But so that's cool that you brought that up. So I played that game, I guess, relatively recently within the quarantine time. It's
Yeah.
Journey. That's the name of the game.
Journey, right? Yes.
Um, and I wanted to play it earlier, but it was only on I guess PlayStation 3 or something. So, but it came on Steam, so I got it and I finally played it. It's a really short game, but that's what happened. Like you're playing by yourself, and the cool part is that you don't even know that someone is playing with you until I guess they happen to pair you. They just somehow seamlessly pair you with someone, and then you get to decide whether you want to continue the whole thing with them or you kind of stay with them for like one level. When I played like that one person, I guess we ended up going to the very end together, which was really cool because you kind of feel like you don't like you said you can't talk, but for some reason you feel like you're like doing this together because it's like the name implies it's a journey, and it's difficult. You have to go through a bunch of stuff, and they purposely made the game so that you can't like troll people. I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever end up meeting that person? Like at the end of the game, would you like to like friend request them?
Yeah, they
Or,
do. The cool part is they tell you the names of the people you played with, so
oh,
you
cool.
could reach
Okay.
out to them on Steam or whatever it was and say
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I had a good time playing with you" or
That's
something.
wild. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool because it's like they they created an environment which incentivizes people to be good to each other, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I think they definitely iterated through of like, okay, we purposely do not want voice because we know people can abuse that sort
Right.
of thing. Yeah, but yeah, that's
Henry, I
it.
got to run in a little bit.
Mm. No, that's cool. Yeah, that's good. We can just wrap up or end this.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't know if we I don't know if we figured anything out, but it was definitely I got some good ideas for for like open source related community events.
yeah, I mean, I don't expect us to figure it out, and I mean, I kind of go back to this thought of like the idea of figuring it out is implying like there's a single solution. I mean, you mentioned
Yeah.
this already. The solution is many different things at once.
Yeah.
There's a hierarchy of solutions. There's the other phrase I use like fractal nature of things. It's like you need different levels of solutions for different sizes, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. Just the idea of fractal is already just like what. So yeah, it's hard, and we're working on it.
Totally. Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's a really important part that I try to keep in mind. Yeah, there is no one solution.
Cool. All right, yeah. Thanks for just talking out loud. I mean, yeah, we didn't play any of this. We're just
Yeah.
trying to figure
Thanks.
things out. Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
cool. Awesome. All right. Thanks for whoever two people are watching.